Okay, so this is a kind of a recap of what we did in the georeferencing lab, and just a reminder, if you go on your C file, you should be able to find lab6_georeferencing and download the data. And the data is, once you download it, it's all zipped files in here. When you expand them, countries Europe and ocean will expand into the full shape file, countries Europe and ocean. And the reference map here is actually what I've already done as a georeference for you to kind of see as an example, and then the scanned map is what you will try to georeference when you download it. So I've also included this PDF here, checklists_georeferencing, and that's kind of for you to just have a little reminder sheet of like kind of the steps, the very general steps. The particulars are covered in the video, but so step one is investigate source and the matching projections and identify the layers. So when I say investigate the source, I mean investigate the thing you're trying to georeference, right? So I'm going to open up this scan map and we're going to take a quick look at it, and I'll go over kind of the things about this map that we're interested in. Okay, and we're interested in the fact that there are two different types of spatial data here and kind of one type of attribute data here. So the attribute data is a ratio type, right? It's in percentage, and the attribute data tells us what is the percentage of the total actively occupied population in industry. So it's telling us, given every area on this map, what is the percentage of the population that is occupied, that is working in an industrial kind of occupation. And that's useful for kind of understanding the World War II landscape. So the aerial spatial unit are these kind of blobs that we're trusting that the people who compiled this map did a good job of kind of aggregating generalized data. So other than aerial, meaning A-R-E-A-L, meaning from area, other than the aerial spatial data, we also have this point type of data, and these are towns. And so it's trying to show kind of this one attribute in two different ways in one map. One attribute, one spatial variation on that attribute would be these blobs, and the other one is the points. So to georeference this map, I think what we had talked about was we don't necessarily trust the borders right away because they're pretty generalized, and we don't know if our borders match up exactly to when these were kind of recorded. But what we do know is that the coastline is very unlikely to have changed at all between then and now, or then in the time our data was recorded. So I think we're going to try to use coastline points and islands and things like that to try to reference this map to our data that we trust. Okay, so we've kind of investigated this map a little bit to see what it's made of. And the next step, if I can call that up here, is to open and investigate the ancillary data, which means we're going to just take a quick look at the shapefile that we're going to reference our source to. And then we're going to open the georeferencer. So we're going to open QGIS, look at the data that we want to use to reference our JPEG or our scanned map to, and then we're going to georeference it. And so in order to georeference it, we have to kind of open that tool up and make these settings. So go ahead and do that. Let's open up QGIS. And once you open up QGIS, you can drag and drop. I've already done it here, but you can drag and drop countries Europe in there. And if you open it to a past project file, you can go ahead and open up a new one. And when we open up our countries Europe, we see that, yep, the borders are more detailed here, so maybe we don't want to trust borders, but the coastline is roughly the same. Maybe we can trust little pieces of the coastline, so I feel okay maybe about georeferencing that source map to this coast. So now what we want to do is we actually want to open up our Geo-Referencer tool. And so to do that, it should by default be under the Raster toolbox here. And if you look at the Georeferencer right here, you can click the kind of sidebar, and that's the tool we want. If it doesn't show up right away, you might have to go to Plugins, Manage and Install Plugins. And I've already typed it in here because I had to turn it on, but if you open up Plugins, it'll say all and installed and not installed and such. And you want to type in Georef. Oops, Georef. And this is a tool that usually has an icon associated with it, and you can click the box to turn it on. And then say either install or just OK, and you should be fine once you turn it on. And once you turn it on, you have your raster toolbox should have the georeferencer that pops up there. Okay, and once you open the georeferencer, I tend to like to make it 2 separate screens so that I kind of have a split screen way of working, like this, and that's pretty good. And there we go. The first thing of all to do is to load the raster you actually want to georeference. So I usually use this button here. You can also go File, Open Raster, but it's nice to have the button. So I just hit Open Raster, and we want to reference the scanned map, right? This is a TIFF. This is one that already has geographic information associated with it. I did this kind of for you if you wanted something to reference. But for us right now, we're using this scan map, which is a JPEG, just like you get off a scanner, right? So if you brought your map to a scanner, it would crank out a JPEG, and you'd use this to georeference. So I click that. I'm happy with that. Say Open. It pops in here. And before I start adding control points, I have to set my transformation settings. And those, if you don't remember, are these guys. The thin plate spline, which is how it turns, how it morphs it, how it smushes the image to match the landscape. Nearest neighbor is how it writes that image. And then set the destination is how we, what we call the file and where we put the file on the computer. And then once we do all that, and also the spatial reference system, we can create the control points, which is kind of the fun part. So let's go to this cog looking yellow thing here, which is the settings. So click that, and I've got my thin plate spline, got my nearest neighbor, and my CRS, so long as it matches my my existing coordinate reference system or my spatial reference system, then I should be fine. So 100,001 is my user ID, this custom projection that our data came in, and that should be fine. If you can't find it, you can, if it's not in the drop down here, you can always click this button, and you can type in this exactly up here, and you should be able to find it. But I'm happy with that. And output raster, I don't want to just type in right here willy-nilly. I don't want to call it whatever, because it's going to just dump it to a default location. So I want to always kind of click my ellipsis here and tell it exactly where I mean. In this case, it knew I wanted to go to my lab 6 folder, but if it didn't, make sure you navigate to the desktop, to your lab 6 folder, and then we can call it, I think we called it Hobbs 1930, or Hobbs 1930 underscore rectified. I tend to do that. I put an underscore between my name and kind of any adjective or other part of the file that tells me what it is. This is a rectified image of this map. So save. Happy with that. I'm going to let it load into QGIS after I hit the play button, so that should be good. I say OK. And now we get to add the control points. To add the control points, I want to have this button kind of depressed here, which is the settings button almost for these series here. This means create point, this means delete point, and this means move point. We don't have any points yet, so I'm going to actually make sure that this one is the one that's clicked. And I just use my mouse wheel, and whatever screen your mouse is hovering over lets you zoom in and out. And just for practice, I think we used kind of the UK. If you try to do all of Europe, you'll get it all pretty good. These are similar enough kind of projections that it should line up. But just for the sake of making it easier, I just chose the British Isles. So let's just stick with that for this demo. The good thing to do, of course, is to find very particular and kind of pointy or rigid places that you know haven't changed and seem similar between the data that we know is a little bit more detailed in kind of the historic map. And so I think I chose the point at Cornwall, so I'm going to zoom in here and click that. And now this is asking me what coordinates does that mean, and I am not a genius, I can't just type it in. So I have to choose from the map canvas. Say from map canvas, then it says, okay, what point did you mean in the geographic system? And I click that, and it says, ah, that's this coordinate, and I say okay. And then the red dot appears on both, which is good. And now I want to make sure I create a nice kind of round the circle, you know, I don't know, somewhere around a pentagram or in a hexagon. I want it to be aerial, not collinear. I want it to be the whole area. So I'm going to go ahead and find, this is the fun part, to try to find kind of different places that you think are similar between the two. And I'll let you do that, and I'll catch you up on the other side. Okay. I went here and I think I added around 8 or 9 points. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I decided to put a couple more in the center. Last time I just did the Isle of Man, but this time I put one up in Argyll here and in Wales, just for Anne there, you know. And then the same Galway and tip of the Harris there, and kind of around the back side here. So kind of adding more points for this method tends to work pretty well. And they're not collinear. They're kind of in a nice, well-distributed set. And so now if I'm happy with everything, my settings should be okay. I should be able to hit go and watch it as it georeferences, and it'll take a couple minutes. Cool. And in general, the more points you add, the more time it will take to georeference. And also, the more you do in one particular place, the more wild and less fitting it will be outside of that. Just imagine how crinkled a piece of paper might get if you smushed all the points in the middle, and then the rest just kind of got all crinkled up. So as the further away you get from these points, the more wildly inaccurate it becomes. But so if we kind of toggle this back and forth, it looks pretty good at this scale. I mean, very good actually. But the nice way to do the comparison is really to make this half transparent. So what I do is I right-click Hobbs 1930 Rectified, go to Properties here, and I like to just take the transparency, which is underneath Style, and bump it up to about 50. And I say OK. And then I get to zoom in and look at our handiwork. And it looks like a lot of the coastline is pretty good. The places it doesn't match very well, I think, have to do with generalization of the historical map more than anything. I might, if I wanted to, add a couple extra points where I can see that they'd make a difference, right? So you could go in here and you can either move some of the points using this tool. You could click and drag like this, and same over here. You could delete points you didn't like at all, or add new points, right? We could just say, well, this is pretty far off. Why don't we take that and add it to, it should be right there, right? Okay, and then once we're happy with our new, kind of our new adjustments, we can hit this button again. And we can look at the changes. So instead of opening this up, if I want to be really clever, what I can do is actually take my old one, copy the style, right, the transparency, and then right-click this one and say Paste Style, and that gives me both. So now I've got 3 layers going on, which is kind of confusing, right? So if you want to look at the differences between your 2 georeferences, you can kind of toggle them back and forth. So I added that extra point. This is my old one, and when I added that extra point, it smushed it over. So it's kind of fun to see that, actually, I think, to see how well that, I don't know, that thin plate spline, I think, is a really good algorithm. It really does a good job. So I think that a couple of extra points, once you can see, can really make it kind of come together. So that's all for this video, and I'll get you a digitizing video as soon as I can. Thanks.